Angus MacAllister and the Mystery of Maxwell's Equations. Part 1. Chapter 1. Shadows of George Street. A cold north wind pushed against his face, making his eyes stream as Angus MacAllister made his way through the crowded streets of Edinburgh. He tightened the collar of his old tweed trench coat that had seen much better days, but was like a faithful friend he refused to abandon. His efforts to seek shielding from the elements were however in vain as the bitter wind chilled his bones. 20 minutes earlier he had been perched on a bar stool in his favourite haunt, Bennett's Bar, an old and well-worn hostelry on Maxwells Street in the genteel suburb of Morningside, his fingers idly tracing the condensation on his glass of Guinness. The dimly lit bar burbled with quiet conversations, but Angus was comfortably lost in his own thoughts. Just as he was about to take a sip of his beer, his phone vibrated, and a shiver of both excitement and trepidation went down his spine, as Detective Inspector Heather Dawson's name flashed across the screen. Without hesitation, Angus answered, and Dawson's voice crackled with urgency as she relayed the grim details of a murder, a body discovered at the base of the James Clerk Maxwell Street on George Street.
"You might want to come over,"
she said sympathetically.
"It's someone you know, and there's a peculiarity that might be right down your street."
She went on to explain that the victim was Victoria Reynolds, a long-standing friend and poker-playing soulmate of MacAllister's from the DeMarco Poker Club they both frequented, and the intriguing thing that there had been a piece of paper tightly clutched in her hand. Angus's heart quickened, his adrenaline surging through his veins in anticipation of a mystery, but the sadness of his friend's demise forestalled his normal exuberance of a new case. In the 10 years since his retirement from the Royal Air Force, his new career as a private investigator had been, on the whole, a series of cases tracing missing people, some who really didn't want to be found, serving writs and summonses on abusive spouses and reluctant witnesses, and the occasional genuine mystery that he had found he had a unique talent for solving. It seemed he had a gift for finding the truth where others failed, and it was these cases he lived for. He quickly downed the rest of his drink and made his way to the door. Outside, wind-tossed trees in the small park opposite mirrored his mental turmoil as 1,000 questions raced and tumbled in his mind. Who would murder Victoria, a sweeter, nicer person you could ever meet? It wasn't as if she led an adventurous or dangerous life. She was a researcher at a university, a job she often described as dully interesting. And the biggest risk she ever took was raising the pot with a bluff at the poker club on a Tuesday night. He climbed into his beloved jet-black Jensen Interceptor, and after several attempts, swear words, and the unhealthy grating of an aging starter motor, its engine rumbled to life. He accelerated into the night, weaving through the labyrinthine streets of Edinburgh towards the grim puzzle that awaited him on George Street. MacAllister's well-worn brogues caused echoes against the cobblestone pavement as he approached George Street, a grand wide street that formed the heart of Edinburgh's new town, lined with majestic Georgian buildings, their stone facades weathered by time. The street exuded an aura of faded grandeur. The elegant townhouses, now almost exclusively businesses, were once the abodes of the city's elite. They now stood as witness to the passage of history. In the centre of the wide road, the towering figure of the James Clerk Maxwell statue loomed before him. Its cold bronze gaze seemed to hold secrets of its own. It was here, at the base of this monument, that a life had been extinguished, a murder that was destined to lead Angus down a treacherous path. Victoria Reynolds' lifeless body had been discovered by a passer-by, left to rest amongst the shadows cast by the statue of the man whose work and equations governed the very function of modern life. As Angus approached the crime scene, he couldn't help but notice the commotion. Police officers scurried about, flashing blue lights illuminating the night. A couple of journalists jostled for position, trying to see inside the blue and white scene of crime tent that had been erected at the base of the statue, hungry for any scrap of information that could feed their insatiable appetite. D.I. Heather Dawson, a seasoned investigator who Angus had worked with on 2 previous murders and whom he greatly respected, approached. A Police Scotland weatherproof jacket flapped over her conservative black suit, and a black polo neck nestled beneath her stern but attractive face. Her eyes bore the weariness that only the horrors of countless cases could convey.
MacAllister.
She greeted him with a nod, acknowledging his reputation as a detective who could uncover the truth where others faltered.
You're here sooner than I expected. We found this in a hand,
she said, showing MacAllister a clear evidence bag containing a piece of paper on which he could see were written a version of the very equations embossed on a brass casting on the statue's plinth. Maxwell's equations. Scribbled notes and comments covered the edges of the paper. MacAllister took out his phone and asked Dawson if it was okay to take a picture. She merely nodded. Angus tapped his phone and the simulated shutter sound confirmed they had a record of the mysterious piece of paper. Angus returned her nod, his piercing blue eyes meeting hers. She didn't deserve to die this young, he stated, emotion bubbling just below the surface of his voice. With your blessing, I'd like to dig deeper. Dawson sighed, her voice filled with a mix of scepticism and respect.
Oh, that's why I called you. But be careful. This just feels wrong. As I'm sure you know, Miss Reynolds' research post at Heriot-Watt University was concerned with Maxwell's equations.
Angus nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Looking towards the crime scene tent, he asked if it was okay to take a look.
Could I stop you?
Dawson grinned. He stepped closer to the crime scene, careful not to disturb any evidence that might hold the key to unlocking the secret surrounding Victoria's death. Entering the tent at the base of the statue, MacAllister smiled in recognition of the white coverall-suited figure who knelt studying the body. Dr. Steele, MacAllister said quietly. Have you any idea how she died? Steele's grey eyes crinkled as he turned to face MacAllister. No, and I won't until I've carried out an autopsy. I wouldn't like to comment. However, you may wish to draw your own conclusions. He pointed to a small burn mark about the size of a 5-pence piece on the back of Victoria's neck, and then to the sole of her right training shoe, which was melted like an ice cream on a hot day. If I didn't know better, I'd say she'd been struck by lightning, but there hasn't been a cloud in the sky all day, so it's fair to say that didn't happen. This is no ordinary murder, MacAllister whispered to himself as he stood up. He cast one last gaze at the Maxwell statue. Its imposing presence seems to challenge him, beckoning him to unearth the truth that lay hidden within the enigmatic equations. With a resolute expression, MacAllister stepped away from the crime scene, ready to immerse himself in the unravelling of his friend's brutal murder. Chapter 2. Revelation. Angus MacAllister's mind raced as he made his way through the bustling streets of Edinburgh. The information he'd uncovered about Victoria Reynolds and her mysterious work consumed his thoughts. At their last encounter at the poker club, she had hinted at a breakthrough in her research. Determined to unravel the enigma surrounding her, he had decided to pay a visit to Professor Weems, Victoria's professor at Heriot-Watt University. Driving over to Riccarton in the southwest of the city, MacAllister parked opposite the modern brick and glass buildings of the university. As he approached, he walked past a statue of James Watt, the Scottish inventor, mechanical engineer and chemist who improved on Thomas Newcomb's steam engine with his Watt steam engine in 1766, which was fundamental to driving the Industrial Revolution in both Great Britain and the rest of the world. MacAllister couldn't help but notice a similarity to Maxwell's statue, both in appearance and the simple fact that both these men had changed the world beyond recognition. The scholarly atmosphere was palpable. Heriot-Watt University was a renowned and prestigious institution of higher education, with campuses located in Edinburgh, Scotland and Dubai. Founded in 1821 as the world's first mechanics institute, it had a rich history of providing excellent education and research opportunities. MacAllister couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and trepidation. With a deep breath, he entered the grand building and made his way to Professor Weems's office. As he knocked on the large pine door, a curt "Come" came from within. Entering the office, he found himself surrounded by bookshelves laden with tomes of scientific knowledge. The room was adorned with diagrams and equations scrawled on chalkboards, evidence of the intellectual pursuits that took place within those walls. In the centre of it all, seated at his desk, was Professor Weems, a tall, thin, bespectacled man with a thinning crown of white hair. "Ah, MacAllister, my secretary said you were coming over," Professor Weems greeted him. "To what do I owe the pleasure of your visit?" Angus shook the professor's hand firmly. "Good day, Professor. I hope I'm not intruding, but I have some questions regarding Victoria Reynolds and the nature of her research." Professor Weems arched an eyebrow. "Ah, Victoria! Such awful news of her murder! Have the police caught her killer yet? Such a brilliant mind, that one, always delving into the mysteries of the universe. Please, have a seat." Angus settled into the chair and his curiosity piqued. "Unfortunately not, Professor. The police have no leads as yet. I've reason to believe Victoria was working on something of great significance, possibly related to electromagnetism and Maxwell's equations. Could you shed some light on the matter?" A flicker of surprise or possibly concern crossed the professor's face, but he quickly composed himself. "Well, Mr. MacAllister, it seems you've done your homework. Victoria's work was indeed revolving around Maxwell's equations, the fundamental laws that describe the behaviour of electric and magnetic fields." Professor Weems stood up, moving to one of the chalkboards. With a piece of chalk in his hand, he began to explain. "Maxwell's equations are a set of 4 interrelated equations that unify electricity and magnetism," he began. "They were formulated by James Clerk Maxwell in the 19th century and form the foundation of classical electrodynamics." As Professor Weems meticulously drew symbols and equations on the chalkboard, Angus listened intently, his eyes following the intricate lines and mathematical expressions. "These equations describe the relationship between electric and magnetic fields and their sources, such as electric charges and currents," the professor continued. "They encompass everything from the behaviour of light to the principles behind generators and motors. They're truly the backbone of modern electromagnetism." Angus nodded, absorbing the professor's words. The complexity and elegance of the equations fascinated him. "But what does all this have to do with Victoria's work?" Angus asked, his voice tinged with anticipation. Professor Weems paused, his gaze fixed on the chalkboard as if lost in thought. "Victoria was exploring the applications of Maxwell's equations beyond their traditional scope," he finally replied. "She'd been conducting experiments and calculations to uncover new possibilities, to unlock hidden realms of energy and power." Angus leaned forward, his eyes wide with intrigue. "Hidden realms? What do you mean?" The professor turned to face Angus, his eyes shining with a mixture of excitement and caution. "I can't reveal all the details, Mr. MacAllister, as Victoria wanted to keep her research under wraps until she was certain of its implications. But I can tell you this much. Her work involved pushing the boundaries of electromagnetism, seeking to harness forces and phenomena that lie beyond what we currently understand." Angus absorbed the professor's words, a mixture of awe and curiosity bubbling within him. The idea of Victoria delving into uncharted territory, exploring the unknown through Maxwell's equations, filled him with a sense of wonder and trepidation. "Thank you, Professor Weems. That's all very helpful," Angus said, rising from the seat and taking his phone from the pocket of his tweed sports jacket. "You've shed some light on Victoria's research, but I still have much to learn. Do these handwritten notes mean anything to you?" Angus showed the picture of the piece of paper found in Victoria's hand and watched as the colour drained from the ageing professor's face. No, nothing," he stuttered, far too quickly for MacAllister's liking. "I've no idea what they mean." The professor's face changed and he smiled kindly. "Continue your pursuit, Mr. MacAllister. Seek the truth, but be prepared for what you might find." With these curious parting words echoing his mind, Angus left Professor Weems's office, his determination renewed and his curiosity spiked by the blatantly obvious fact that the professor had lied. The hidden realms of energy and power that Victoria had been investigating beckoned him, and he vowed to uncover the secrets that lay within them, no matter the cost. Crossing the street and getting into his car, MacAllister decided he needed a second option on the handwritten notes and racked his brains to think of who he'd be able to help. Once again, the Jensen decided it wasn't going to play ball, and MacAllister got out of the car, opened the boot and removed a hammer. Opening the bonnet of the classic but temperamental beauty, he tapped the starter motor a couple of times and tried the key again, smirking with satisfaction as the big American V8 burbled into life. You and I are so similar, old girl, he mused to himself. We both need a little help getting going, but when we do, boy, can we motor. Slipping the car into gear, he headed off to seek counsel from the smartest man he knew. Chapter 3. The Ingenious Deduction. MacAllister's mind was abuzz with newfound knowledge and curiosity as he sped away from Heriot-Watt University. He knew that unravelling Victoria Reynolds' research would require just more than information. It would demand a sharp intellect and a clever approach. With this in mind, Angus had decided to seek the assistance of his younger brother, Callum. As renowned for his brilliant deductive reasoning as for his reluctance to venture out into the world beyond his home. Callum resided in a quaint cottage in the outskirts of Edinburgh. The cottage was a haven for intellect, scattered with books, papers, and various contraptions that piqued the interest of any visitor. As Angus entered the cottage, he found Callum engrossed in a stack of ancient parchment texts, his brow furrowed in concentration. At 6'4" tall and slightly overweight, Callum was the opposite of Angus's trim rugby player build, and his slightly stooped posture betrayed a life of academic study. His tortoiseshell glasses were perched on his nose as he embraced his brother fondly. "Ah, Angus," Callum explained. "What brings you here today? I hope it's a fascinating puzzle that requires my expertise." Angus grinned, knowing Callum's thirst for intellectual challenges would soon be quenched. "Indeed, dear brother, I seek your insight into the enigma that is Victoria Reynolds." Callum's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Victoria Reynolds, the poor girl murdered in George Street. Do tell, what is the mystery?" Angus settled into a chair, placing his phone with a picture of Victoria's handwritten notes on the table between them, and brought his brother up to speed. "I've reason to believe that these notes hold the key to her research and ultimately her murder. They're filled with equations, diagrams, and possibly references to locations," he concluded. Callum's eyes focused on the notes, his mind already at work. "Let's examine them together, shall we?" The brothers pored over the page, scrutinizing every line and symbol. Angus pointed out specific notations and references, seeking Callum's expertise in deciphering their meaning. After a moment of deep contemplation, Callum spoke up. "These equations, Angus, they're not conventional. They bear a unique pattern, almost like a secret code. See how the symbols deviate slightly from standard notation?" Angus nodded, his curiosity piqued. "What could this code represent, Callum? What purpose would it serve?" Callum leaned back in his chair, his eyes focused on a distant point. "Codes are often used to convey hidden information, to protect knowledge from falling into the wrong hands. And if Victoria went through this sort of effort to develop the code, it must mean that her research held immense importance." Angus's mind raced, considering the implications. "So what can we deduce from this, Callum? How can we unlock the code?" Callum smiled, a glimmer of excitement in his eye. "We must look for patterns, Angus. We must compare these symbols to other mathematical symbols, ancient languages, or even symbols used in alchemy. If Victoria sought to hide her discoveries, she might have drawn inspiration from historical codes." Callum walked over to a long oak shelf in the wall in the untidy room, which was lined with dozens of bottles of rare malt whisky, and slowly stroked his chin as his eyes ran along the slightly dusty bottles. "Inspiration, dear brother. Inspiration in a bottle is what's required to solve this mystery." His gaze paused on a bottle of 30-year-old Macallan, and a satisfied cluck emanated from the tall, slightly stooped figure. "Mr. Alexander Reid's finest, I think," Callum explained as he poured 2 generous measures into heavy Edinburgh crystal glasses. The light from the coal fire sparkled and flashed in the precise cuts of the glass as he handed it to his brother. 30-year-old, Angus exclaimed as he swirled the amber nectar and sniffed the heady aroma. That must be worth, yes, dear brother, a king's ransom, but cost and quality are bedfellows seldom separated. They toasted one another and sipped the whisky that a wise man had once described as like an angel crying on your tongue. Now to work, Callum boomed. The brothers spent hours examining the equations and comparing them to various systems. Their discussions led them down paths of ancient numerology, cryptology, and even mythical symbols, but nothing made any solid sense. As the hours sped by and the heat of the fire mingled with the warmth of the whisky, Angus found his eyes getting heavy as he sat in the overstuffed armchair of the cosy room. Suddenly, his brother was shaking him awake. Eureka, dear boy, Callum shouted. Angus, look at this symbol here, pointing to a triangular shape that to Angus's eye looked exactly like any other version of Maxwell's equations. It resembles a symbol used in the alchemaic texts. It represents transformation and change. Angus leaned in, now fully awake and his heart pounding. Alchemy? Transformation? What could Victoria have been hinting at? Callum's voice was filled with excitement as he pointed to a particular equation. This equation, it describes a process of transformation of energy. Her notes suggest that Victoria may have been working on a method to harness and channel vast amounts of energy through a specific location. And this line here, he pointed to a small line of text at the bottom of the page that referenced stars and planets, I believe is a specific location. Angus's mind raced with possibilities. A specific location, but where? Callum's gaze shifted to the nearby window where a breathtaking view of the Pentland Hills stretched before them. The Pentland Hills! Look at this reference. Victoria mentioned the alignment of celestial bodies and their influence on this location. It's a potential site for her experiments or possibly a clue to her discoveries, and so far as I can tell, it's the Pentland Hills. Unfortunately, the exact location escapes me. Now pass me that book of astronomical tables. I have much work to do. Sitting back in his chair, Angus lit a small, thick cigar and watched transfixed as his brother scoured through books and tables, unfolding maps and referencing calendars as he muttered to himself, scribbling notes in his undecipherable handwriting, and pacing the room as his huge intellect wrestled with the puzzle presented by the code. Time passed slowly until he slammed his fist onto the table and thrust a finger at a point on an Ordnance Survey map. How could I have missed it for so long? He exclaimed in frustration. A child could have solved this. Ushering his brother to his side, he said, Come, Angus, see here. It's in plain sight all the time. I thought this T symbol was a variable, but no, look at this map. The T Woods, a famous and very visible landmark at the foot of the Pentlands. It's said that the Trotter family planted the T Wood in 1766 as a memorial to a descendant of the house who fell in battle. It is a Greek cross in plan, if seen from directly above, which fits with the symbology in the equation, but it's a T-shape as seen at the distance from the north. That's where the coordinates lead us to, the exact point where the two lines of the T join. Are you sure? Angus inquired. No doubt, brother dear, Callum replied. I'm only ashamed it took me so long. He laughed. Now sally forth, my brave sibling, and seek to discover the secret at that location. Angus's heart quickened, a mix of anticipation and trepidation filling his being. A journey into the Pentland Hills beckoned, and with Callum's brilliant deduction, a new path had been illuminated. Now he would venture forth, seeking the truth that lay hidden within the ancient hills, eager to uncover Victoria Reynolds' extraordinary research and the secrets it held. Chapter 4. Confrontation in the Woods. Heading south out of Edinburgh, MacAllister steered the Jensen towards Lothianburn, and turned off when he saw the sign for the Midlothian Snow Sports Centre. While heading down the narrow road, he could see the complex of buildings overshadowed by a network of white artificial ski runs lying halfway up the high hills. Children in bright-coloured clothing were hurtling down the slopes, shrieking with delight as he parked in the car park and opened the boot of the Jensen. Pulling on a pair of heavy hiking boots, MacAllister headed out of the car park to the west, catching a first view of the T Woods, a dark and slightly menacing sight that made his heartbeat increase in anticipation of what he might find. Climbing over a couple of barbed wire fences and crossing a field with horses, MacAllister stood at the edge of the dense tea wood. He cautiously made his way into the dark, musky shadows. The air hung heavy with anticipation, and an eerie silence only added to the suspense. But he was determined to unravel the secrets concealed within these ancient woods, unaware of the danger that awaited him. As he ventured deeper, a sudden movement caught his attention. He turned just in time to see a large figure, completely clothed in black, with a hood drawn tight over his head, lunging towards him with a wicked-looking blade. A knife MacAllister knew well, a Fairbairn Smythe fighting knife, developed specifically for the British commandos during the World War II, as a killing tool and deadly in a trained hand. As the attacker lunged forward with a vicious thrust, MacAllister swiftly sidestepped, his senses honed by years of training. He retaliated with a lightning-fast kick aimed at his opponent's midsection. The attacker staggered back, momentarily stunned by the force of the blow. Seizing the opportunity, MacAllister closed the distance, launching a barrage of strikes. His fists blurred through the air, each blow calculated to maximize damage. The attacker desperately parried and dodged, narrowly evading the onslaught, but MacAllister's relentless assault pushed him further into a defensive position. With a sudden surge of energy, the attacker thrust his knife forward, aiming for MacAllister's heart. Sensing the danger, MacAllister swiftly twisted his body, avoiding the lethal blade by mere inches. He responded with a swift roundhouse kick, striking the attacker's wrist and forcing him to release the weapon. As the knife fell onto the leaf-strewn ground, both men lunged forward, desperate to gain control. MacAllister's karate expertise became evident as he executed fluid movements, deflecting the attacker's punches and kicks with ease. With each parry, he found an opening, delivering powerful counter-attacks. The attacker grown increasingly desperate, he made a final reckless lunge. MacAllister, calm and collected, deftly sidestepped the assault and seized the fallen knife from the ground. One seamless motion, he spun round and his eyes focused and determined. The attacker, now off balance, stumbled forward, realizing his grave mistake too late. In an instant, MacAllister lunged, thrusting the attacker's own knife into his chest with a swift, precise strike. Time seemed to stand still as the attacker's eyes widened with shock and pain, and his body went limp, collapsing to the ground. MacAllister, his heart pounding with adrenaline, took a step back, surveying the scene before him. The woods fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the distant sound of the city. The attacker's lifeless body lay sprawled on the damp ground, the knife buried deep within his heart, a haunting reminder of the consequence of his malicious intent. MacAllister stood over the dead figure, a wave of conflicting emotions washing over him, victory mingled with concern for the unknown assailant. Who was this person? Why had they attacked him so ruthlessly? Determined to uncover the truth, he searched the stranger's belongings, hoping to find answers. His attacker's pockets were empty, apart from a photograph of MacAllister and a hand-drawn map of the Tea Wood. The map showed a precise location, marked by a red circle, just a few hundred yards from where he stood. Taking one last glance at the body, MacAllister pulled out his phone and scrolled through to Detective Inspector Dawson's number. He pressed call, but was presented with the no signal icon. Grunting in frustration, he decided the call could wait. Let's face it, he thought, this guy isn't going anywhere. I'll report this as soon as I have a signal. As MacAllister neared the designated spot, his heart raced with anticipation. He looked around, trying to spot any peculiarities in the surrounding terrain, and then he saw it. An oddly shaped mound of earth, subtly different from the rest of the woodland floor. Kneeling down, he dug through the loose soil, eventually revealing a buried box about the size of a small briefcase made out of weathered wood, bound by iron bands. It appeared ancient, as if it had been concealed for generations. A sense of reverence washed over MacAllister as he realised he was about to unlock a long-forgotten secret. The box, however, was not as easily opened as he had hoped. It possessed a complex lock, a codex mechanism adorned with intricate engravings. MacAllister's mind raced as he tried to decipher the mechanism's hidden code. He traced his fingers over the engravings, feeling the subtle grooves and indentation, hoping to unlock the box's secrets. And realising the sun was very low in the sky and his chances of cracking the code were slim, MacAllister tucked the box under his arm and headed back down the slope. Immediately he was stopped short in his tracks. The body of his attacker was gone. Checking he was in the same place and spotting a blood stain where they had fought, MacAllister knew he was in the correct location. But how had the body gone? He was absolutely sure he was dead. No one could have had a knife that size embedded in his heart and live. MacAllister looked around, his senses tight as piano wire as he searched the darkening gloom, but saw nothing. So tightening his grip on the box, he headed back to the car, ever alert and anticipating further violence. Safely back in his car, MacAllister put the box on his passenger seat and drove straight to Callum's house. If anyone could open the lock, it would be him, he thought as he drove. 10 minutes later, he was parking outside the small cottage that was a refuge for his younger brother. Walking straight in, he shouted, "Hello!" and was answered only with a loud snoring. His brother was slumped in his favourite armchair beside the embers of the coal fire, the bottle of Macallan empty at the table beside him. Typical, MacAllister thought as he mused how his brother had a habit of celebrating success by overindulging. "I guess you won't be much help to me tonight," he thought, and he picked up a tartan blanket from the couch and, after gently covering his beloved brother, left the cottage, locking the door behind him. Back in his flat on Maxwell Street, in the genteel suburb of Morningside, MacAllister paced his kitchen, looking at the box that sat on the table, mocking him. 2 hours had gone by, and he'd tried everything he could to open the codex lock. He'd tried ciphers, codes, even his trusty lock-picking tools. He was a proficient lockpick, but this had resisted his best effort. He was about to give up and go to bed, resigned to returning to Callum's for help in the morning, when he heard the communal door open and his upstairs neighbours, Maxine and Tash, coming in, obviously the worse of wear from a good night out in the town. They were both high-class escorts who lived on the wild side of refined Morningside life, but MacAllister had a soft spot for both of them, as they had hearts of gold and were fun to be around. Rough diamonds. As usual, as soon as they got in their own flat, the music started. Sledgehammer by Peter Gabriel pulsed through the ceiling, loud but tolerable. Then the epiphany. It was like a cartoon light bulb appeared above his head. Why mess about with codes and lockpicks? MacAllister went to the hall cupboard where he kept a small but adequate toolkit. Removing the hammer, he walked back into the kitchen with an evil glint in his eye. 30 seconds later, the box was open. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed part 1 of Angus MacAllister and the mystery of Maxwell's equations. Hit subscribe and the notification bell so you don't miss part 2, coming soon.